Beneath the merciless howl of the blizzard, her breath a mist swallowed by the frozen night, she stumbled upon a figure, neither dead nor fully alive, a Apache warrior, bound and bleeding, in the shadowed corner of the cabin. The bitter cold gnawed at her bones, but the weight of her choice pressed heavier. To save him was to gamble not just with her life, but with the fragile soul of the untamed frontier itself. The cabin, a solitary refuge carved from aged timber, creaked under the wind's relentless assault. Outside, the storm raged with cruel intensity. Snow whipped in swirling flurries, pounding against the fragile window panes, as if demanding entry. Inside, the only warmth came from the dying embers nestled in the hearth, their faint glow casting flickering shadows that struggled against the encroaching darkness. The scent of burnt wood mingled with the metallic sharpness of fresh blood, saturating the narrow room with an uneasy tension. She was no stranger to hardship. Years of solitude on this unforgiving edge of civilization had etched steel beneath her weathered skin. Calluses on her hands, eyes sharpened by bitter loss, and the silent cadence of survival formed the armor she wore daily. Yet, standing over the wounded warrior, her heart thudded unevenly, a fragile rhythm amid the chaos. Her fingers trembled as she peeled back the tattered cloth strangling his arm, revealing raw flesh glistening with crimson. The warrior's dark eyes, heavy with pain yet fierce with unyielding spirit, met hers briefly, a silent challenge suspended between them. Her mind wrestled with the peril, harboring. A hunted Apache was a blade's-edge decision. One misstep could invite death, not just upon herself, but on the fragile peace of this wilderness outpost. The scent of danger seeped into every corner of the cabin. His pursuers were close, no doubt trailing shadows through the storm's veil. Each second she hesitated raised stakes higher. Yet, beneath suspicion and fear, a reluctant ember of compassion stirred within her chest. They were both strangers here, trapped by fate's cruel hand in a land that brooked little mercy. She reached for a torn linen strip, dampening it carefully with water warmed over the hearth. Her movements were slow, methodical, betraying the war waging inside her, a battle between hardened instinct and the whispered call to honor an ancient code she scarcely understood. As she dabbed at the jagged wound, his eyes narrowed with a mix of distrust and grudging acceptance, the tension in the room vibrating like threads strained to breaking. No words passed between them. Silence spoke volumes. The precarious truce of two souls, strangled by circumstances beyond their control. Outside, the tempest battered the cabin walls with ceaseless fury, a symphony of elements refusing respite. Time stretched taut, every creak of timber and whistle of icy wind sharpening her senses. Suddenly, slicing through the tempest's roar, a sound emerged, distant, faint, but unmistakable. Footsteps crunching steadily toward the cabin's fragile sanctuary. Her breath caught, the fragile calm shattered like thin ice. Many companions who walk these forgotten trails tell tales of destiny slipping through fingers like snowflakes caught in a gale, before the next perilous turn unveils itself. A new revelation lingers in wait. Cast a wary eye below the video and ensure your place among this restless band remains unbroken. Do not lose the thread of our saga. Check that your name is still enrolled in the circle, ready to journey when the story's fire rekindles. The wind continued to claw at the cabin's fragile walls, its relentless howl swallowed by the thickness of the blizzard outside. Inside, the air hung heavy with the mingled scent of blood and wood smoke, the dim light of the dying fire casting trembling shadows across the rough timber beams. She sat close to the Apache warrior, her hands cautious but determined as she worked to staunch the bleeding from his bound wrists. His dark eyes never left her face, guarded and unreadable, a turbulent storm as fierce as the one raging beyond the cabin. Trust was a delicate thread, fraying between them with every exchanged glance. Years of solitude had wrought her into a woman wary of strangers, especially one marked by scars from a world she only half understood. Yet, beneath the weight of suspicion, a flicker of something else had begun to glow, perhaps a shared sense of survival, an unspoken acknowledgement that neither of them would make it out alive without cooperation. Without words, she moved to gather what meager materials the cabin offered, dragging a fallen plank closer to the door. The walls had held through many storms, but the weakening howls of the tempest promised the night was far from over. Together, awkward and tense, they set about reinforcing the shelter, he cutting branches with a jagged knife, she nailing wood where it rattled loose, each action punctuated by the storm's fury and the widening chasm between their worlds. She watched him closely as he worked, powerful yet restrained, his muscles taut beneath dusty hides, his breathing shallow from pain and cold. He said nothing, each silent movement a testament to endurance carved from pain and purpose. She, too, stayed silent. The space between them, filled with memories neither wished to share. All at once, the weight of cultural divides bore down like the relentless wind. The fire in her heart flickered between fear and compassion. His people, survivors of countless betrayals, taught him to trust none outside their own. And yet, here was a woman who risked everything to keep him alive. Suddenly, the floor creaked beneath soft, nearly imperceptible steps, though outside the snowstorm masked all but the closest sounds. Her breath caught. She rose slowly, moving to the window, brushing a smear of frost aside. There, pressed against the blinding white landscape, footprints marred the fresh snow. Fresh and too close. Her eyes narrowed. Not alone. The danger had not passed with the first footsteps last night. Whoever pursued him was closing in, their hunting shadow tightening around the cabin. The realization pressed against her like the biting cold. This fragile sanctuary was no longer safe. Turning back, she faced the Apache, her voice low, equal parts warning and plea. They're close. We need to be ready. He met her gaze, the fierceness in his eyes now sharpened. More than mere pain bleeds beneath that surface. A coil of pent-up defiance, a warrior's unwillingness to surrender. This forced alliance, born from desperation, began to crack the walls of silence. Their hands brushed briefly as they worked side by side, gathering scraps of cloth and wood, to fashion weapons, to fortify their fragile defenses. The storm continued its merciless assault, a deafening wall of ice and fury. But inside, time folded into a tense stillness, threaded with whispered breaths and restrained glances. For a moment, as the gusts roared past the cabin, she allowed herself to watch him, not as an enemy or a stranger, but as someone bound by the same harsh frontier, both prisoners of circumstance. The complexity of his silence spoke volumes. He bore secrets too heavy to share, memories etched into every scar, the weight of a tribe's fate hanging on his shoulders. The distance between them felt both vast and yet impossibly close, each combatant in a silent war of mistrust and shared need. Hours dwindled under the storm's wide, frozen canvas. At last, as she pushed aside a shattered plank to seal a breach, her gaze caught something. The fresh markings pressed deep into the snow, just beyond the cabin's fragile walls. Tracks, not just of one, but many, some boot prints, others bare and fierce like talons. The hunters were near, circling like wolves. Her heart quickened, the sharp drum of urgency echoing in her chest. The frigid air was less biting than the breath of death that now crept unnervingly close. Turning to the Apache, her voice steadied, colder yet resolute. "They're not far. They're hunting us. We won't last long if we stay here." He nodded slowly, the silent understanding between them etched into the lines of his weary face. She saw then a flicker of vulnerability, hidden beneath the warrior's stoicism, an urgent need to survive that transcended their differences. Outside, the wind clawed harder, rattling the cabin as if warning of the storm yet to break beyond the snow. As they gathered what remained, preparing for the inevitable confrontation, the cold dimness pressed tighter around them, a cage woven of ice and shadow. The footprints in the snow spoke of a hunter closing the distance, and the unforgiving wilderness waited with bated breath. They were not alone. The enemy was close. The cold outside was no longer the only threat pressing against the cabin walls. Through the swirling fury of the blizzard, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps pressed closer, sharp and intentional, too measured for the chaotic dance of the storm. She caught her breath, eyes wide, tracing patterns on the frost-fogged windowpane. The footprints carved distinct lines in the fresh snow, boots heavy with purpose, closing the deadly circle around their fragile shelter. Inside, the tension coiled tight between them. She shifted her gaze from the cold desolation outside back to the Apache warrior. His dark eyes, filled with hardened resilience, flickered with something new, an urgent fire ignited by the awareness of impending danger. The fragile truce they'd clumsily forged now bristled with raw urgency. "We're no longer alone," she whispered, her voice slicing through the dim, calm like a sharpened blade. "They're closing in. That group hunting you, they're here." His jaw tightened, nostrils flaring, as he struggled against the pain that lanced through his bound wrists. But the steel in his gaze deepened. Slowly, the silence he had guarded for so long began to crack beneath the storm's howl. They come for what I carry," he said, each word deliberate, heavy with unspoken history. "My failure," he added bitterly, voice rough like the rugged landscape he'd come from. She pressed a hand to the rough wood of the wall, grounding herself. The truth began to settle, thick and cold as the snow outside. The burden he bore was heavier than mere flesh wounds. It was a destiny tangled with his people's survival, one carved in loss and shadow. "We need to prepare," she declared, voice steady despite the pounding echo of her heart. "We can't wait for them to break through." Her fingers ran over the meager supplies, the broken plank she dragged against the door, the sharpened splinters they'd fashioned into weapons. He took a breath, and despite the pain, pulled himself upright, revealing the sinew beneath his dirt-streaked skin. A warrior carved by hardship, unwilling to yield. As the night deepened, their movements became a silent rhythm. She hammered nails with grim determination, each strike a heartbeat in the war to come. He worked with fast, precise cuts, shaping branches into crude spears, the scrape of his blade sharp against the ambient silence. Despite the language unspoken, a fragile bond knit them together, both trapped by fate, bound by the necessity of survival. But beneath the practical acts lay a deeper exchange, whispered shadows of shared fears, the weight of unspoken grief. The silence between them was not empty. It brimmed with things better left unsaid. Failures that haunted him, losses that hardened her soul alike. The fire sputtered low, casting jagged shadows that clung to the walls like desperate ghosts. Outside, the wind howled an icy dirge, rattling the fragile timbers and stinging the skin beneath their clothes. Suddenly, the stillness inside broke with the sharp scrape, a frantic jingle of metal, and the softest creak betraying movement at the door. She froze, every muscle drawn taut as a bowstring. His hand found hers briefly, fingers gripping with shared resolve. In that instant, years of solitude, suspicion, and unspoken pain hung, suspended between them. No words were needed. The threat was raw and immediate. Then came a voice, low and gruff from outside. "I know you're in there. Open up!" Her heart hammered. Every instinct screamed that opening the door meant death. Yet she felt the ache of the warrior's presence beside her, the fragile ember of trust flickering amid the storm's fury. His eyes searched hers. In that fear, that determination, they found an unspoken pact, to stand together, come what may. The first blow struck the door before she could answer, a brutal crash that splintered wood and sent splinters spraying. She rolled back instinctively, pulling the bound warrior with her toward the dimmest corner. The cabin groaned beneath the violence. A cage threatened to break at the seams. The sounds outside echoed like wolves snarling, booted feet pounding nearer, armed with malice sharpened by cold calculation. In the flickering firelight, shadows danced like specters of death lurking in every corner. He shifted, muscles coiling despite his wounds, and for the first time, words tumbled free between their gasps. "They want the papers," he rasped. "Evidence of the lies, of the betrayals." Her eyes narrowed. This was more than a fugitive's chase. This was a war fought in whispers and secrets, a battle that threatened to erase his people's truth. The next strike shattered a plank, a crack splitting the air. Without hesitation, she grabbed a heavy beam, bracing herself to push back. The warrior rose with pain etched across his face, but with the fierceness of a man whose people's fate hung by a thread. "We fight," she said, voice hard as flint, "for survival, for truth." Outside, the storm roared louder, as if to drown out their resistance. Yet inside the battered cabin, two souls, one shaped by frontier hardship, the other by ancient struggle, stood poised on the knife's edge between life and death. Together, unspoken, they prepared for the night's darkest hour. And as the wind rattled the broken walls, a shadowy figure slipped closer, under the tempest's veil. Seeking an entrance, an agent of vengeance ready to strike. The night after their violent stand, the cabin lay silent, but trembling beneath the howling blizzard. Their breaths, ragged and shallow, mingled in that freezing air. The Apache warrior's wounds throbbed beneath the layers of cloth she had painstakingly wrapped and pressed, the crimson slowly darkening into bruises of faded agony. The weight of the secret he bore was heavier than any blood loss, though neither spoke it aloud yet. At last, the warrior broke the silence, his voice low, deliberate. "I carry more than scars, papers, artifacts, proof. Proof of a betrayal meant to erase my people from this land." His dark eyes reflected the flickering firelight, haunted, resolute, burning with a desperate hope. She swallowed hard, the bitter taste of disbelief mixing with the cold. "Proof," her voice cracked, barely above a whisper, the walls closing in as the truth clawed its way out of his guarded silence. "Proof of what?" He shifted, wincing as a fresh wave of pain surged through his battered frame. "A conspiracy," he said. "Men in uniforms, men with no honor. They seized our land with lies, treaties broken before ink dried. They seek to bury the truth. My mission was to save it." Her fingers unconsciously tightened around the rough wood of the cabin's back wall. Memories she tried to keep locked away stirred. Stories whispered in broken tongues, the weight of history's cruelty on both sides. She felt the fire within her flicker, stubborn, wary. The sound of the wind outside seemed to grow louder, as if nature itself urged her to listen. Years of frontier hardship pressed on her chest, but so did a rising tide of something unexpected: conviction. "Why trust me with this?" she asked, voice steady despite the ragged chill in her lungs. His glance darted to hers, eyes dark pools swirling with pain and cautious hope. "Because I have no choice. Because survival means crossing impossible lines." He drew from beneath his cloak a small, worn satchel and carefully revealed its contents. Folded papers, scrupulously inked maps, and an amulet carved from bone, symbols foreign and sacred. She studied each item, the weight of their significance settling in. "If what you say is true, this puts us both in greater danger." A shadow of fear passed across her face, quickly masked by determination. "But I will help you, because I cannot let this darkness spread." Their fingers brushed briefly over the cold wood plank they both leaned upon, an unspoken promise, forged by mutual defiance against the storm and those hunting them. Fragile boundary of mistrust wavered, dissolving into wary alliance. Night deepened. Starlight lost beneath the fury outside. The blizzard raged, but inside the cabin, plans and quiet resolve took shape. They scavenged the remains of her sparse provisions: nails, scraps of wood, even a rusted hunting knife, creating crude defenses and weapons with hurried hands. Each movement spoke of survival, intertwined with a growing kinship. Though words remained scarce, heavy with the weight they carried, her eyes caught his face in half-light, fierce, haunted, who carried not just wounds, but an entire legacy on his shoulders. For a moment, she shared his burden, the understanding flowing between them without need for speech. But the night brought no reprieve. Outside, a figure watched, a shadow cloaked in darkness, eyes burning with cold intent. Hidden beneath the storm's veil, the silent sentinel measured their fragile sanctuary with deadly calculation. It was a predator waiting, preparing for the moment to strike harder. Inside, the cabin walls groaned beneath the tempest's assault. She sensed the presence beyond, felt it in the tightening in her gut. Steeling herself, she whispered, "They will come again, stronger, more ruthless." Her gaze met the warrior's, steady and filled with shared dread. The warrior nodded slowly, breath shallow but spirit unbroken. "We cannot hide forever. What I carry must live, to honor those we lost." She pressed a hand to his, the warmth a fragile shield against the merciless cold, and the harsher danger that stalked just outside. The storm's howl seemed to draw tighter around them. The night folding into deeper shadow, and through the veil of snow, the cloaked figure shifted, stepping closer to the cabin's brittle threshold. An unseen enemy poised to tear through their fragile defense and shatter the fleeting hope they had forged. In the silence between heartbeats, the bitter truth landed like a stone. They were not alone. The Watcher waited, preparing to unleash a fury more brutal than before. The blizzard raged with relentless fury through the frozen night, wrapping the cabin in a suffocating shroud of ice and shadow. She stood at the fragile window, eyes peeled for any movement beyond the swirling white veil. Outside, the snow lay thick and heavy, but faint tracks marred its pristine surface, fresh footprints circling close, stealthy and deliberate. The enemy was closing in. Inside, the air was thick with tension, heavier than the cold that seeped through cracks in the timbered walls. The Apache warrior shifted slowly, wincing with every breath as pain radiated from his bound and bleeding wrists. Her hands hovered over the wounds, ready to tend again, but neither of them spoke. Words had been scarce since the night before, swallowed by mistrust and cautious endurance. Yet now, the danger lurking outside demanded more than silence. She lowered her gaze to meet his fierce, guarded eyes. "They're coming closer," she said, voice a low whisper edged with urgency. "We can't just sit and wait." His lips pressed into a hard line, the stoicism of a seasoned fighter, barely masking the storm within. "They hunt the papers I carry," he confessed, voice hoarse but steady. "Proof of the betrayals against my people, my failure." She cut him off gently, her fingers brushing against his enduring scars. Failure isn't what's weighed on you. It's survival now, and we survive only if we fight together. A tremor ran through the cabin as the wind slammed against the walls, rattling loose shutters and sending snowflakes drifting inside with the cold draft. Her eyes scanned the meager supplies scattered on the wooden floor. Scarps of cloth, rusted nails, splintered planks salvaged from broken furniture. They weren't armed, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Moving past the gulf of silence, she spoke again, more assured. "We'll reinforce the door, set traps. We'll need every edge we can get." The warrior nodded, eyes shadowed but resolute. Despite the agony, he pushed himself upright, muscles taut beneath threadbare hides. His hands, though trembling, slid a jagged knife free from a hidden sheath at his belt. Together, they began shaping crude weapons from fallen branches, hands working in tense rhythm against the storm's roar. Branches scraped and snapped as she hammered loose planks against the doorframe, each strike sharp and final. The cabin's fragile defenses might not hold long, but it was all they had. She felt the weight of every nail driven home like a heartbeat, each one a small act of defiance against the closing darkness. Their glances met in the pale firelight, brief, charged, an unspoken acknowledgement of the slim chance they had. Centuries of history and fear hung between them. She saw in him not merely a hunted enemy, but a man laden with secrets, scars, and the desperate hope for redemption. For a moment, the storm's fury outside faded beneath the pounding rhythm of their shared will to live. A sudden creak sliced the moment like a blade. Both froze, breaths caught in their chests. The door shuddered under a series of sharp knocks, deliberate, menacing. Silence fell. Only the howling wind answered. Slowly, she crept to the threshold, eyes narrowing beneath furrowed brows. "If we open this door," she whispered, "they'll kill us both." He stepped beside her, the pain etched deep on his face, but his voice firm. Better to face death fighting than to die caged by fear. The cabin fell into a fragile stillness, the moment thick with possibility. And then, from outside, a hoarse voice slithered through the storm's veil. "We know you're in there! Give yourselves up!" She clenched her fists, nails biting into palms, but her gaze held fast, unyielding. "No," she answered quietly, "not while I'm breathing." Suddenly a crash rent the air as the door was battered with brutal force, splinters flying like shrapnel. She reeled backward, pulling the warrior with her, just as the cabin shook with the impact. Their sanctuary threatened to splinter apart. From the darkest corner, he drew in a pained breath, raw strength flaring despite wounds. "They want the papers," he said sharply, voice trembling with urgency and anger. "Proof they want to bury, by any means." Her eyes glittered in the flickering firelight. The truth of their plight, now undeniable, sank into her bones. They were trapped in a tightening circle of betrayal and bloodshed, an invisible war waged in shadows, where every secret could mean death. Movements became swift, instinctive. She grabbed a heavy plank, bracing it firmly against the door's shattered frame. Her breaths came deep and steady, blood thrumming in her ears. He seized the length of stout wood, sharpening one end with his knife, ready to fight. Outside, the storm's roar swelled, as if to swallow their defiance whole. But inside, a fierce determination burned. Two souls, bound by necessity, standing shoulder to shoulder in the face of ruin. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the scouring wind and the grinding scrape of desperate footsteps. They prepared for the inevitable, with every nail, every splintered barricade, every hastily carved weapon, a fragile fortress forged from hope and grit. The warrior faltered, pain flickering behind his dark eyes. She caught his wrist before it collapsed and whispered, "You're stronger than this. We'll make it." It was more than hope. It was a promise. At last the storm abated slightly, revealing a frozen expanse outside, a bleak plateau bathed in pale moonlight. As they forced their way into the biting cold, survival instincts took hold. But fate was cruel. On that ice-slicked ledge, shadows lunged from the whiteness. In the scuffle that followed, the warrior was struck down again, deep crimson blossoming across his side as he crumpled, breath ragged and shallow. She dropped to her knees beside him, heart hammering a fierce lament. The blizzard's cold could wait. Now, the true battle had just begun. The bitter wind whipped around them, carrying the distant howl of pursuers closing in, sealing their fate in ice and blood. The warrior's breaths grew shallow, each labored inhale searing through his battered frame. She knelt beside him on the worn floorboards, her hands trembling as she tried to staunch the bleeding from his ribs. His dark eyes, shadowed with pain, flicked toward her, a flicker of trust breaking through the stoic veil. The tempest outside howled, its icy fingers clawing at the cabin walls, shaking the fragile refuge they had fought so desperately to hold. Within this dim space, the air was thick, not from the cold, but from the weight of unspoken histories pressing on their souls. She traced the wet lines on his skin, faintly glowing in the firelight, reminders of wounds, both seen and unseen. Memories, sharp and raw, flared inside her, a past streaked with loss and solitude, with moments frozen in time like the endless winter nights outside. Her voice, rough from the bitter wind and unspoken grief, barely rose above the crackle of the hearth. "I've lost too much," she confessed, eyes cast downward. "My family, the land I called home. Sometimes I thought the cold would be kinder." The warrior's gaze softened, a fleeting shadow crossing his fierce countenance. "War takes more than flesh," he murmured, voice heavy with the weight of his own scars. Scars carved by tribal wars, betrayals, the endless fight for survival in a land that had swallowed so much beneath its vast skies. Their wounds, though born of different battles, echoed in unison beneath the roof's tenuous shelter. In this shared frailty, the armor of suspicion began to crack, thin shards of compassion piercing the hardened fronts each guided fiercely. She adjusted the makeshift bandages around his torso, careful not to cause more pain. "We're bound by this, by what's broken and what's left to heal," she said. But tremor in her voice, betraying hope, she scarcely allowed herself to feel. "I don't know your story, but I won't let you die here." His eyes searched hers, piercing yet weary, and something in that gaze unspooled a thread of trust between them. He exhaled, the breath ragged but steadying. "I carry ghosts," he admitted, "of battles lost, of kin vanished like smoke on the wind, but also of a mission, a truth that must live." Outside, the blizzard pounded harder, relentless in its fury, as if the world sought to cleanse itself of all that clung to broken souls within its frozen clasp. Yet inside the cabin, a fragile warmth flickered, an ember kindled by shared pain, by the unexpected kinship born from the harshest winter's trial. Her hands busied themselves gathering shreds of cloth and torn wood, fashioning splints and reinforcing the crumbling walls. Each action was measured, deliberate, no room for hesitation in a night balanced upon a knife's edge. Silence lay heavy between them, punctuated only by the occasional groan of the old timber and the rustling of fabric. Yet, beneath the quiet, a subtle shift took root, a steadying of heartbeats in tandem, a melding of wills. Refusing to succumb, she caught his eyes as he crafted a crude sling from frayed rope, fingers stiff but steady. "Who will come for you?" she asked softly, fear threading through the question. He hesitated, as if weighing the right moment to pull back the shadows he guarded so fiercely. "Men who do not call themselves friends," he replied. "They seek to silence the past, to bury the truth, and erase the bloodlines it protected." Her breath hitched as rage and sorrow mingled within her. "Those who wield power by lies and steel, they leave nothing but ashes and tears." He nodded slowly, gaze fixed on the flickering firelight, as if drawing strength from the flames themselves. "I carry proof, papers and relics that speak of broken promises, conspiracies meant to drown my people's voice." A weight settled between them then, heavier than the snow pressing on the roof. She clenched a calloused hand into a fist, resolve hardening like ice. "We fight, not just for ourselves, but for those who came before, and those who might yet rise." For a moment, their worlds, vastly apart yet mirroring in pain and purpose, intertwined, two souls bound not by blood, but by the harsh frontier's unyielding demand for endurance. The storm's fury did not abate. From the shifting shadows near the cabin's weather-worn doorway, a subtle sound stirred, soft yet alien to the howling wind. She stiffened, muscles coiling in sharp readiness. "Wait," the warrior warned, voice tight like a drawn bow. "There is someone from my tribe, a woman." Her eyes narrowed, wary, but hunger for hope flickering. The promise of an ally was a thread she clung to fiercely. Through the veil of swirling snow, the sound of steps approached, deliberate, measured, carrying urgency beneath the tempest's roar. The door creaked under the weight of the blizzard's breath as the figure materialized. A woman cloaked in furs, eyes bright with the cold fire of determination. Her presence shattered the cabin's fragile isolation with a pulse of urgent news pressing against the storm. The warrior's gaze locked with hers, relief mingling with dread. They planned their final strike, an assault to end us, here in this cabin. A long silence stretched between the trio, the cabin holding its breath as the winter night seemed to pause in anticipation. She steadied her voice, hardening like tempered steel. We have little time. We prepare, together. Outside, the blizzard's howl reached a crescendo, but within those fragile walls, a new alliance was forged, one born not of trust, but of necessity, binding their fates in a fragile hope that tomorrow might yet dawn. The trap was set. The war was coming home. The blizzard's roaring fury outside had begun to wane, the wind's gnashing teeth receding into a low moan that rattled the fragile cabin. Inside, the dying fire struggled to hold back the creeping cold, its orange flicker casting long shadows on the weathered walls. They moved with cautious urgency, limbs still stiff from wounds and weariness, knowing the calm was a brittle pause, an ominous breath before the storm of violence loomed anew. She stood near the battered door, a pile of loose planks and splintered wood stacked against it as barricades. Her fingers, raw and aching, gripped a rusted hammer tightly, driven by a fierce determination that burned hotter than the embers. Across the sparse room, the Apache warrior, his muscles taut beneath dirt-streaked hides, held a jagged knife, sharpening a sturdy branch into a crude spear. His eyes, dark and unyielding, flicked occasionally to the narrow window where the white wasteland outside stretched endlessly, veiled still in swirling snows. Their breaths mingled in the cold air, a fragile rhythm of survival stretched thin by the pressing weight of their plight. The alliance between woman and warrior was stitched together by necessity, native pride clashing with frontier grit, suspicion tempered by grudging respect. Words were sparse, every movement carried meaning born from instinct and shared peril. We can't hold them for long, she muttered, the gravel in her voice betraying fatigue. These walls won't keep out men bent on murder. He nodded, pressing his lips into a hard line. They come for what I carry, proof that would shatter their lies. They will break this shelter or burn it down. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken memories. Battles waged long before this frozen night. Losses both visible and deeper than skin. Those scars mapped his body, more invisible wounds haunted his weary gaze. She moved to a corner, gathering scraps of cloth and broken cupboard hinges, tying them to ends of sharpened wood to fashion makeshift weapons. Every small task was an act of defiance, a whispered rebellion against fatalism. Outside, the snow's relentless patter dulled as the blizzard's heart slowed. But the storm had merely shifted. The footfalls had ceased momentarily, their heaviness muffled by the drifting plains. But the threat remained, circling, patient. The door creaked under the strain of the earliest assaults, a groan of wood protesting their fragile fortress. Her fingers tightened around a thick plank. If they break through, her voice faltered. Swallowed by 1,000 fears she refused to name aloud. He stepped closer, the pain in his body etched deep, but his spirit less fractured than ever. Then we fight, he said, each word a sharpened blade, for truth, for survival, for those who cannot fight anymore. They worked in tandem, sealing gaps, throwing cloth against cracks to quiet the sound of the storm's assault. For moments stretched thin, the cabin felt less like a cage and more like a desperate bastion, a shared heartbeat against the cold void. The cold seeped deeper with every breath, but so did a burgeoning, fragile trust. She caught herself watching the graceful, restrained power in his movements, each one precise and purposeful despite his pain. He was no longer a stranger shackled by circumstance, but a warrior bearing the weight of an entire forgotten people. Suddenly, a faint cracking noise sliced through the quiet, soft but deliberate. They froze, hearts hammering in unison. From outside came a low whisper, slurred by the lingering wind. "Open up. You won't survive the night if you hide." She swallowed down panic, exchanging a swift glance with him. The moment hummed with lethal tension, the fragile walls no match for relentless hate. "They're ready to tear this down," she whispered, voice barely audible over the fury outside. He sheathed the knife with a slow, deliberate movement. "Then we make this place their grave." The first blow shattered the thin wood paneling beside the door, sending splinters flying like brittle arrows. She stumbled back, pulling him with her toward the darkest corner, their breaths ragged, mingling with the crackle of fire and distant storm. Yet even as the violence surged, their eyes met, luminous pools of defiance gleaming through shared pain. The silence between them broke with a new tension, a binding pact forged in the crucible of imminent death. "They want the papers," he rasped, voice strained but fierce. "Proof that our people were betrayed, that promises were broken in blood and shadow." She bit her lip hard, pounding heart echoing his words. This was more than a fight for survival. It was a reckoning with history itself. A battle for memory against forces seeking erasure. The enemies unleashed another violent blow. The cabin shuddered violently. She swung a heavy beam with every ounce of strength left in her, forcing the door back for precious seconds. He gritted through pain, brandishing his spear, ready to strike. Time fractured into fragments of desperate survival. The collision of wood, flesh, and fury echoing like thunder in the frozen night. They moved together with fierce synchronicity, a dance of savage endurance. But then, amidst the chaos, a sudden silence fell. Her gaze darted toward the fire, nearly spent, but still alive, and then to him. Despite his wounds, a spark of hope flared in his grim eyes. From beyond the battered door came a whisper, soft steps, a breath held in suspense. She tensed, waiting, knowing this lull was a cruel prelude. And then the cabin's door burst inward with a violent crash. In that instant, she flung herself forward, pushing the warrior behind her, arms outstretched, a silent sacrifice, a shield forged by sheer courage. The storm, the fight, the cold, all held their breath. The enemy had breached their last refuge. The battle for their lives was about to become a storm unleashed. Her sacrifice was the gateway to survival, an act born from desperation and a flicker of hope. The shattered door yawned wide, and the next chapter of their story hung suspended in the rain of icicles and blood as the enemy surged forward like winter itself incarnate. The fire sputtered low, casting trembling shadows across the cramped cabin as the blizzard outside roared with untamed ferocity. She moved with cautious resolve, her breath shallow in the cold air, while the Apache warrior sat against the wall, silent but restless. The distance between them felt vast, woven by years of mistrust, cultural chasms, and the raw terror of being hunted. Yet necessity had drawn them into an uneasy alliance. She glanced at him, noting how the flickering light traced the rugged lines of his face, worn by battles both physical and unseen. Though his wrists remained bound, and the blood still seeped from ragged wounds, his eyes burned with a quiet defiance. For all his silence, the weight pressing on his shoulders was palpable, a secret held tighter than any knot in his bindings. Without a word, she gathered the loose wooden planks scattered near the doorway. The relentless wind hurled snowflakes against the fragile walls like icy spears, reminding her that this shelter was barely a shield. Together, albeit awkwardly and wordlessly, they worked to reinforce the cabin's defenses. His hands, calloused and precise despite their trembling from pain, cut small branches into crude stakes. She hammered nails into the weather-beaten wood, each strike a grim heartbeat echoing through the frozen night. Though words remained scarce between them, the unspoken tension simmered beneath every movement. Their coexistence was marked by the collision of worlds, her frontier grit clashing against his tribal dignity. Each glance carried suspicion. Every breath mirrored the sheer weight of survival on the edge of extinction. Yet beneath it all, a fragile ember of trust flickered, stubborn against the storm. She paused, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, and caught sight of fresh footprints pressed deep into the snow just beyond the cabin's thin walls. Her pulse quickened, a cruel confirmation. They were not alone. The tracks told a chilling story. Heavy boots circled cautiously, intermingled with the bare, fierce imprints of hunters familiar with the wilderness. The enemy was closing in. Turning her gaze to the Apache warrior, her voice fell to a low whisper, laced with urgency yet tempered by the tired steel of hard-won resilience. They're here, closer than we thought. His jaw clenched. For the first time since their uneasy truce, he spoke, a gravelly voice heavy with shadows of betrayal and loss. They hunt the papers I carry, proof of their lies, of broken promises, my failure. She swallowed sharply, the bitter sting of what those words truly meant settling deep within her. It was more than a simple chase. It was a war fought in shadows, a fight to preserve a people's very truth. Then we prepare, she said, determination sharpening her tone. We can't wait for them to break through. They moved with hurried purpose now. Splintered wood became barriers at every weak point. Scraps of cloth were fashioned into dampened rags to muffle their movements. He shaped jagged sticks into weapons, his hands surprisingly steady despite the pain that stole. Across his features, her eyes met his briefly, a silent pact forged without words. Two souls bound by the stark necessity of survival. Minutes lost meaning under the storm's wrath, and the world outside narrowed to the brittle walls of their shelter. Until, suddenly, a faint but deliberate creak sliced through the brittle calm. From somewhere beyond the battered door came a low, menacing voice. I know you're in there. Open up. Her heart thundered in her chest. The truth pressed against her harder than the biting cold. Their fragile sanctuary was on the cusp of collapse. He rose unsteadily, the grimace of pain etching deeper lines across his face, but his eyes blazed with an unyielding fire. "They want the papers," he rasped, "proof buried in blood. They will stop at nothing." She gripped a heavy plank, her knuckles white with the tension coursing through her veins. "Then we fight, not just for ourselves, but for those who cannot fight anymore." The cabin groaned under the assault as the enemy hammered the door again, splinters flying, the very air charged with the promise of violence. She dragged the warrior toward the dimmest corner, shielding him with her body. Their breaths mingled sharply, ragged and uneven. Between crashes and the howl of the wind, he whispered, "The lies run deep, and the hunt ends here." Time fractured into shards of desperate preparation. Nails drove into wood, splinters formed weapons, and shared glances conveyed a million fears and hopes no words could capture. The cold seeped deeper, but so did a flicker of something. Unexpected, kinship born from hardship. Suddenly, a prolonged silence fell. The howling blizzard seemed to hold its breath. Then, the cabin door crashed inward with a violent roar. Without hesitation, she lunged forward, throwing herself in front of the Apache warrior, a living shield forged in desperation. The weight of the moment pressed down like the endless winter night outside. Through the spinning storm, through the rising clamor of battle and breath, she felt it first. The searing edge of sacrifice. The enemy had breached their last refuge, and the battle for their lives was burning bright, a storm unleashed within fragile timber walls. Amid shattered wood and swirling snow, the fierce struggle pressed onward, and the fragile alliance between frontier woman and Apache warrior was tested beyond all limits. Outside the battered walls, unknown eyes watched the chaos unfold, hunger sharpened by shadow and revenge. Their sanctuary was no longer safe. The hunter's circle tightened, and the war inside these cabin walls had only just begun. The shattered door lay twisted on the floor, snow and splinters mingling in the bitter air that rushed through the cabin. Her body shielded the wounded Apache warrior. As the harsh storm outside briefly relented, a cruel pause before the final tempest. The enemies surged forward, men cloaked in darkness and hatred, intent on seizing what he carried, the fragile proof of a people's silenced history. But inside this battered refuge stood two souls forged by survival and sacrifice, bound together by more than circumstance. She pushed her aching limbs to hold the line, halting the first assailant with a strike of the heavy wooden beam. His fall echoed with a hollow thud that shook the cabin's weary walls. The warrior, though weakened, rose beside her, each breath a blade of pain, but fire gleamed behind his resolute eyes. "Hold them back," he rasped, voice fierce despite the blood seeping through his makeshift bandages. "This night will decide our future." The clash was harsh and raw. Wood cracked under boots, sharp blades scraped against splintered planks, and desperate struggles stained the air with fury and fear. She fought with every ounce of strength, each moment a testament to the frontier's unforgiving spirit. His spear thrusts were measured despite the wounds, carving a deadly rhythm that tempered the chaos. Suddenly, a deafening crack split the cabin as another enemy swung, a heavy axe against the wall. The timbers groaned under the assault, loosening the very bones of their sanctuary. For a breathless instant, the fragile fortress trembled on the edge of collapse. She caught the warrior's gaze amid the storm of violence, a silent plea, a shared determination to protect what mattered most. His fingers brushed hers briefly, a promise carried in that fleeting touch that the fight was not just for survival, but for justice. A sudden roar pierced the tempest, the enemy leader charging, eyes blazing with ruthless intent. The warrior met him head-on, the two colliding like thunderclaps amid the cold air. Knives flashed, and the cabin became a battlefield, etched in sweat and blood. Blows fell heavy and fast, but in the warrior's eyes burned the strength of generations, unyielding and fierce. The enemy faltered beneath his relentless defense until, with one final devastating strike, his foe collapsed. Silence claiming the space between snow and shadow. Breath heaving, the warrior straightened, the weight of his mission carrying new urgency. Outside, the storm's fury softened, the blizzard's howl retreating like a bowed adversary. She knelt beside him, hands trembling yet steady, as she pressed a cloth to his battered side. "You did it," she whispered, voice breaking with relief and sorrow. "We did it." His gaze softened, a rare smile flickering through the pain. "Not yet ended," he murmured, "but this battle, it's ours." A quiet moment settled between them, a fragile calm after the storm's wrath. The fire crackled low, its warmth wrapping the cabin like a gentle promise that life, however battered, endured. Just then, the cabin's weathered door creaked softly. A figure stepped inside from the swirling snowstorm, a woman clothed in furs, her eyes sharp, carrying news heavier than the lingering cold. "They come again," she said urgently. "But we are ready. The tribe stands with us, no longer alone." The warrior's shoulders straightened, a renewed strength coursing through his veins. She rose to her feet beside him, the weight of loneliness broken by this unexpected alliance. Together, the three moved through the cabin, readying what remained, a testament to resilience carved from trust and shared fate. The woman's presence was a beacon amid the darkness, a reminder that even in winter's heart, warmth could grow. Outside, the pale light of dawn began to pierce the lingering storm clouds, casting soft hues over the frozen expanse. The brutal night had passed, leaving scars and stories intertwined, yet promising a fragile hope. They stepped beyond the cabin's threshold, the snow crunching beneath their boots, a sound both harsh and healing. The warrior held the worn satchel tightly, the precious relics within still safe as guardians of truth. She looked to him then, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Your fight is not forgotten. Neither is your courage." He nodded, voice steady with resolve. "And yours, the frontier's strength is as much in kindness as in grit." In that quiet moment, past and present converged, the meeting of two worlds balanced between loss and renewal. The bitter winds still whispered of hardship, but a new path lay unfolding, one where deep wounds might begin to mend, and where trust dared to bloom against the frozen silence. As the sun rose fully, igniting the vast white landscape with light, they knew the road ahead would be long and fraught. Yet, together, they had forged something more than survival. They had forged a future. The story of the Apache warrior and the frontier woman was no longer one of loneliness and fear, but of alliance, remembrance, and the enduring strength of the human spirit amidst the endless wild. Their footsteps traced the first marks of dawn, an unspoken vow to carry the truth beyond this frozen place, into whatever horizons awaited, beyond the storm, beyond the past. And so, beneath the soft glow of morning, their journey came to a close, not an end, but a beginning, written in resilience, courage, and hope.